Good morning, Mark. It's good to be with you once again.
Good to
I'm
be.
excited for our discussion today.
Yeah, good to see you, Mike.
I'm Dr. Michael Smith. I'm joined once again by my friend and colleague, Dr. Mark Johnston. We are both board-certified psychiatrists with quite a few years of experience, actually several decades each, and we thought it would be fun to share some of our experiences and insights into life. If you find this interesting, which we certainly hope you will find it interesting, please feel free to give us a thumbs up or a comment, and we would welcome that and welcome your subscription as well. Dr. Johnston, what would you like to talk about today?
Mike, I thought that we could talk a bit about the concept of momentum and specifically the kind of momentum that is related to being productive and satisfied in one's life. I think we all have had the sense of what that momentum is, although it can be hard to define precisely. But it has to do with the feeling of being able to pursue those things that matter and to stay on course and to find some genuine meaning in the quality of our activity, not just being busy, but again, having meaningful activity. So I'm going to talk a bit
Right.
about that, talk a little bit about the things that can throw a person off and kill momentum, and then some strategies to regain or maintain momentum.
Okay. Well, that sounds like an interesting topic for us. Momentum is not something that most of us think about when we think about how our brains work or mental illness or mental well-being. Do you want to give me a clue or what your thoughts are about how momentum relates to mental health or lack of momentum might relate to mental illness?
It's interesting that human beings depend on adapting to change and actually physically and mentally maintain a quality of activity and continuing to learn and continuing to be involved in problem solving and creative endeavors is important in terms of the general health of the body. The body doesn't do well at rest. We kind of know that physically. I think it's also true intellectually and cognitively. The body at rest tends to deteriorate. And then one of the problems we have is when we get into a pattern of not moving. I think you had mentioned this when we talked a little bit about this topic together a while ago, that in physics, the body at rest tends to stay at rest, and one in motion tends to stay in motion. Those are the famous principles. Isaac Newton informed us of that or proposed
Right.
that. I think in a broader interpretation of that, it is also true psychologically for us that when we have been in a position where we've lost momentum, where we're not doing things, in some ways it's easier to stay in that state and deteriorate than it is to move ahead.
Mark, if I may just play off of what you're saying there a little bit, I enjoyed physics a lot when I was back in college. If I had more aptitude for math, I might have pursued that instead. But one of the concepts I remember is, like you said, an object at rest tends to stay at rest. An object in motion tends to stay in motion unless there's some force acting upon that. The part of the thought I had as you were talking about it is it does take a fair amount of energy to take that object at rest and put it into motion. It takes less energy, much less energy, to keep it in motion once it's going. So I think that applies to objects, masses in physics, but I think it also applies to our behavior and our intellectual progress. If we are stuck and just idling, it does take some energy to get moving. And we need to think about that and be willing to put that energy in. Once you get moving, it's probably a good idea to not neglect that movement. You want to keep it moving forward, and that's going to take less energy than it took to initially get started.
Yeah, any of the math scholars watching our podcast, and there must be many of them,
Oh,
uh,
I'm sure.
immediately be critical maybe of my simplistic and perhaps not completely accurate memory of the concept of friction. Friction was something that that physicists and scientists argued about for a long time what exactly is friction. But one of the principles they seem to arrive at earlier is the coefficient of kinetic friction, or the impact of drag, say when something was already moving, was less than the static friction, what it took to overcome when things were completely still. In other words, if you push something across the table, you'll still have friction, you'll still have some holdback, but it moves easier than the force required to get it in motion initially. So
Right.
again, if you're a physics expert, forgive me, it's been a long time since
It's been a
that, but
while.
the meaning of that, and you can always strain the analogies, but for human beings, once you're in momentum, even a little momentum, a little movement, it can be easier to maintain that momentum and gain further momentum. So I think it's it's an important thing to recognize when you're stuck, to recognize the things that tend to get people in a place of where they're not moving anymore. And again, let's talk a little bit too about what some of those stresses are and what you can do about them. I'm just going to advance one and let you respond. I think one area that human beings lose momentum is because of grief. We have losses in our life, all kinds of losses. A loved one is a common loss, and sometimes things that are not as obvious to other people too. Hoping that we'd be in a different place in our life when it came to our job. Maybe we didn't get the promotion or didn't have something happen that we had hoped for. We're anticipating some recognition for something we worked hard on and never got it. There are various kind of losses and things, and those can result in a stealing away of our sense of energy and momentum. But let me ask you about that, about grief, and about some other areas you see where people lose momentum.
Yeah, thank you. Back to the analogy, physics and pushing objects around, those things that happen in life, getting disappointments, having a loss of some sort, either a disappointment in your work or as a grief reaction when you've lost somebody in your life, which is a significant thing, those can maybe be like the friction that we're talking about when we're talking about physics, things that keep you from moving forward. And I just want to be clear on this. I think there are times, of course, where it's appropriate and healthy to step back, get some different perspective. If you have lost a close association, a close relationship, either through death or through some other means, it's appropriate to slow down for a minute. We talked about mindfulness, and I don't want to forget that discussion. There are times where we ought to stop, turn off the noise, and just be aware of the moment. You don't want to get stuck there, though. And I think it's important to keep moving forward at some point. Grief is one of those things you've mentioned a time or two, and certainly that can alter a person's trajectory in life. And I think it deserves some reflection.
Yeah, and not always classic grief, grief reactions, maybe, but just disappointments. And again, having it's common for things to not work out just as we would expect, or and depending on how much we're anchoring our sense of ourselves and our successfulness and so on with a certain kind of outcome, we can really be in a place where we can lose a lot of our sense of value and 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 grief, and loss of a serious of a relationship. You see people that end up getting kind of stuck in that grief, and not that grief isn't long lasting or can't be with us. And we understand now that when there's a significant loss, it's not as if there's a time period where it's only normal to grieve for X number of months or something. I mean, it used to be in psychiatry teaching, there was some of that kind of belief, we'll define grief as extending this long and so on. I think we know now that grief can last. Certain kinds of grief can be present for your entire life, but that doesn't mean it's disabling. It doesn't mean that it takes away from your ability to enjoy or seek new relationships, for example. So I think that's really the issue, not just that you are affected and slowed up or that you are dealing with different circumstances, but it's how well you can put that event in a proper context to be able to move ahead with life, continue to enjoy life. And so that would be my comment on it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think this topic of momentum or continuing your positive progress in life is an important consideration in maintaining good health as we go through life. You and I talked a little bit earlier about momentum at different phases of life. And my observation is that when you're young, I'm thinking of kind of somewhere between 15 and 25 is kind of a decade where it's good to get some momentum. And you may not even know where you're going at that point, but you have to continue some movement and you have some options. I think in the past, you and I have talked about flying a little bit. And I know in an airplane, if you don't maintain momentum, the only direction you're going is down. The wing will stall and you will go down. If you maintain some momentum, even if you're going in a direction that ultimately you end up going somewhere else, keeping that wind going over the wings gives you options. And I think when you're young, you need to think about keeping the wind going over the wings of your life so that you have options. And you might decide to go to college or take a job or something, but if you're not moving forward, you're going to lose options. Later on in life, kind of at the stage of life where you and I are, maintaining momentum, I think is a different thing. I suppose if I keep moving forward in life, I have job opportunities and other things, but I'm not really looking for that so much at this stage of life. Why should I bother maintaining momentum? Why should I bother staying actively involved in life? What good is it for me to do that? Or what good am I to anybody else if I fail to do that? And I think that second question is kind of where I have some feelings about it. I think there are bigger overarching issues in life, and one of them is what are we contributing to the world around us? And if we get to a state of mind where we are just coasting and not contributing, we're not contributing to our family, to our children or grandchildren, we're not setting a good example, we're not teaching, we're not being generative, we're not doing our part. And I think there's a moral issue there.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think in the later part of life, the question I have is why maintain momentum? Why keep moving? And I think there are lots of good reasons to do it. It maintains your mental health. You get more satisfaction out of life. There's a lot of things that are directed towards yourself that are beneficial when you keep moving, but also your ability to help others and to leave the world a little bit better than you found it is enhanced if you don't stop, if you keep moving forward. Mark, I wanted to ask you, do you have some examples of people in your life or that you know of that have kept moving forward even later in life and accomplished some interesting things?
Yeah, a family member was successful with starting businesses when she was younger. She had a real design sense and decided to pursue some of that and became a commercial designer for a period of time. And then decided gift stores might be fun with her inspiration for style and design. So she ended up having success with these gift stores. Now, when she retired, all of a sudden, she didn't have the contact any longer with perhaps 60 or 70 employees that had been a regular part of her life for 20 years. And she, when people would ask, "What do you do?" and so forth, she no longer could really say, "Well, I'm the owner of these businesses." Things were in the past. But instead of staying with that, she instead took up the opportunity to support a number of charities and became involved in volunteerism and other activities that one could argue were as meaningful or more so than her activity as a store owner when she provided jobs for other people, which also had
Mhm.
its value. But I certainly like what you said, Mike, about the stages of life. And I think that's quite true. I had the occasion to evaluate and try to help during COVID. I answered the call to help out with some evaluations. One thing that was disturbing, though, is I saw a number of adolescent young adults, actually 21, 23, 25, who really had no momentum. And this wasn't so much related to COVID per se, but they were coming in to me for disability. And I would say, well, okay, what is it that disables you? Well, I don't like to work. And, it was interesting that for some of these people, I think perhaps they've come sometimes from families where a lot was offered to them or done for them. They didn't have much experience or expectation, maybe even had a strong sense of entitlement. Somebody else needed to do the work for them or give them a break or find them a job that they liked. But I think one thing for young people in particular, I think momentum can be enhanced by a willingness to try things and do things even though they don't immediately seem to be the things that you would most prefer in your life. In other words, you don't really start at the top. And I think that's a principle, if you understand it, that you can get some momentum. And then what happens once you're in motion, it becomes easier to have other opportunities, to have more success. And so I think it's a general good principle, not just for young people, adolescents, or young adults. If you're stuck, do small things to get some momentum. And it's surprising once you get a little momentum going, things can improve. If you just stop and think, I'm going to figure this out and I'm not going to do anything until I figure it all out, there are a couple of problems with that. You lose energy, but you also are not gaining new information and experiencing some of the momentum that will help pull you out of it. So if you're stuck or feeling stuck, doing small things to get going is a valuable thing.
Right. Kind of back to my analogy of wind over the wings. That wind is what provides the lift, and continuing to pursue some progress wherever you are in life will generate that lift. If you're going to get over the mountaintop, you've got to have a lot of lift, and you only get that by continuing to move.
I'm not sure if this analogy works well, but I was in a boat in Alaska. It was salmon fishing, and they had a type of drain in the bottom of this aluminum boat that you'd unscrew. And then if you had water in your boat, if you were in motion, it would suck out the water essentially, and you could close it back. And I happened to be with kind of an interesting and colorful guide who got preoccupied when we arrived at our destination. He'd opened this up to drain out, but he arrived at the far shore, got the fishing equipment out, was passing it out. I looked down and I was sinking and so forth. Our boat was sinking because that particular kind of drain only works when the boat's in motion. If the boat's still, the water comes rather quickly up and you find yourself standing in water. So again, a quick example, you want to stay in motion, and there are a lot of examples where not maintaining momentum has its hazards. So
Mark, can I just say before we wrap up, I'm really glad you didn't sink with the boat. That would have been a big loss if you had
I
gone down with
appreciate
the
it.
boat
Well,
and had hypothermia there in the middle of Alaska. That would not have been fun. So I'm glad you kept moving.
thank you for your expression. For a variety of reasons, including not wanting to disappoint you, I did make it back.
I'm glad you made it back. Those Alaska trips can be fun. That's another topic for another day. But Mark, any final thoughts? I think it's time for us to sign off, but wrap this up on momentum.
Not really. I think we've kind of said our piece on some of these things. I think momentum at any age is important and worth pursuing. And when you're stuck or feeling low energy around you, I think it's, it's something you need to deal with. And there are some good techniques, and we'll talk probably more in this series about some of the things you can do.
Yes. And I'm being reminded of another topic that we have to talk about at some point, and that's the role of pets in our life, as I can hear your cat meowing. And
My cat has a good timer. She's telling me that her midday meal is needed. So, yeah,
that's great.
I'll go address her needs now. So,
Mark, thank you. Good to talk to you. And like I said earlier, please give us a thumbs up and leave us a good comment, and look forward to checking in again. Thanks a lot.
very good. Bye bye.
Goodbye.